Reinterpretation, recreation, rebirth, reboot, reimagining, returning. The retcon is not something exclusive to comic book superheroes. Fairy tales and the poems of bards were forever shifting and transforming to suit the times, cultures, and sensibilities they found themselves in. Oftentimes, the original message or moral either disappeared or took on entirely new meanings. Characters frequently changed or disappeared completely from these tales. In the end, Rose Red's sister not only got the prince, but she also got her own feature films, and most importantly, she got to be remembered, unlike Rose. Soap operas have the benefit and disadvantage of being locked into particular actors or actresses who play the dashing heroes, corporate moguls, or independent rogues. They die, they return, but eventually they age and are either allowed the dignity of being the matriarch or patriarch figure, or the finality of death. However, even they succumb to the retcon, as entire storylines have been magically erased or cast aside as mere dreams. Superheroes, however, are much like their distant cousins, the fairy tale. The majority are never allowed to age, and so, at some point within their existence, they find small and oftentimes large portions of their stories, histories, and characters completely altered or swept away. No, it's not as if the revamp is solely the territory of comic books, but it has, however, become a part of the very language of superhero comic books. And to some extent, this is what Alan Moore's interpretation of Supreme, or more accurately, a remodeling of a reinterpretation of Superman, the original comic book superhero, is about. The language of superhero comic books. Supreme, originally created by artist Rob Liefeld as part of his corner of the Image Comics universe under the Extreme Studios imprint, began as Liefeld's violent rendition of Superman. As former Marvel Comics artists, many of the Image Comics creators were itching to tell the kinds of stories they weren't allowed to at the big two companies, where it seems the only two heroes who were allowed to kill were the popular Punisher and Wolverine. The rising popularity of such violent anti-heroes were in a large part due to the success and acclaim of two creators, whose works in the early to mid-80s gained critical attention and fan accolades. Frank Miller's work on Daredevil and The Dark Knight Returns brought an edgier, dirtier look to the mainstream superheroes, while Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' The Watchmen made the argument that any real costumed vigilante would likely have to be, in actuality, a neurotic, violent sociopath. Supreme's origins and personalities changed at the whim of his various writers and artists within a very short span of time. Avenging God, forgotten hero, government experiment, that no lasting retcon seemed likely to stick. Enter Alan Moore. Moore sided with the young creators at Image Comics, but his pre-Supreme work was met with mixed opinions. Aside from his retro Marvel Comics satire, 1963, very little of his work for Image had much impact on the industry. By the time of that series in 1993, Moore was already showing disdain for the empty-headed copycats of his past violent revampings of classic characters such as Marvel Man and Swamp Thing. So, when Rob Liefeld handed Supreme over to him, Liefeld may have had very different expectations for what Moore was about to do. The mid-80s had seen the deconstruction of the superhero, but the mid-90s would reintroduce the sense of wonder and silly joy of superheroes. A reconstruction via works such as Kurt Busiek's Marvels and Astro City, Grant Morrison's JLA, and Alan Moore's Supreme. Moore cleverly mirrors Rob Liefeld's own introduction of the character from the first issue, returning once again from space to the planet Earth. Events transpire which allow him to decide if he wishes to be part of his own revision. Supreme's past is then rewritten as a sort of strange mirror of Superman's own, circa the 1950s to 1960s. This is done not as a swipe or mere homage, but as an intentional reflection, complete with its own Lex Luthor, Dax Darius, Lois Lane, Diana Dane, and the Daily Planet. And here lies the genius of Supreme. His alter ego, Ethan Crane, discovers he is now a comic book artist for Dazzle Comics. The book that he is working on, Omni-Man, is in turn a strange reflection of himself. Supreme ends with Omni-Man about to get the very same reintroduction that we were given at the outset of Moore's version of Supreme. Moore writes the characters, occasionally acknowledging their strange sort of metafictional existence, without having them actually breaking the fourth wall by either speaking to the reader or explicitly knowing that they are in a comic book. As Ethan laments, maybe it's just part of my story. The flashback art of Rick Veitch wonderfully mimics the works of classic artists such as Curt Swan of Superman, Harvey Kurtzman of Mad, Jack the King Kirby, and many others. By using the history and language of other comics, Moore and Veitch flesh out a rich backstory while moving forward. Appropriately enough, it was the 1980s alternative rock band Pop Will Eat Itself who said, "Alan Moore knows the score, considering Supreme is a sort of comic book Ouroboros, devouring its own tale. It is a book wherein books are a common recurring motif, where characters are first introduced by returning." Unfortunately, Rob Liefeld's real-world comic company, Awesome Entertainment, the book jumped throughout Moore's run from Image Comics to Maximum Press and finally to Awesome, lost its financial backing before collapsing completely after a short-lived effort to revive the series by rebranding it Supreme: The Return, and an even shorter relaunch of another Liefeld creation, Young Blood. In a strange twist of happenstance, the last published Alan Moore script containing Supreme was for what was to be Young Blood number 3, unintentionally mirroring Supreme's first appearance in the original Young Blood number 3. I've come to think that the universe is a four-dimensional site in which nothing is changing and nothing is moving. The only thing that is moving along the time axis is our consciousness. The past is still there, the future has always been here, Moore once said in an interview with the New Statesman. Our consciousness is only moving one way through time, but I believe physics tells us that those moments are still there. And when we get to the end of our lives, there's nowhere for our consciousness to go except back to the beginning. We have our lives over and over again. Such is the case with Supreme. No tidy conclusions, just a constant, looping renewal.